I went to the farm because the owner needed someone to stay overnight during calving season. He lived an hour away and the weather had turned wet and cold, the kind that made fences sag and machinery refuse to start. I had grown up around farms, so the work felt normal. The place sat at the end of a gravel road that dipped through low ground before rising to a line of cottonwoods. Beyond them were the barns, a long feed alley, the silage pit, and the old farmhouse with peeling paint and a porch that sloped toward the fields. The land stretched flat and open, broken by drainage ditches and windrows of corn stubble left from fall harvest. I arrived before sunset and did a slow walk of the buildings. The main barn held the cows, their breath lifting in pale clouds, the smell of warm bodies and wet straw pressing into my clothes. The smaller shed stored tools and mineral tubs. The hay barn stood apart, tall and dark, its doors warped from years of weather. The loft ladder had missing rungs. I noted it and moved on. The place felt quiet in the way working land feels quiet, not empty, just steady. The first night passed without trouble. I checked cows every few hours, cleared ice from a trough, and wrote times on a clipboard. Rain drummed on tin. Wind rattled the loose siding. I slept on a cot in the farmhouse living room, boots by the door. In the morning, I noticed a gate at the far end of the pasture standing open. I closed it and blamed the latch, which had always been loose. On the second night, I found a calf separated from its mother near the fence line. It had fresh tags in its ears that did not match the rest of the herd. The owner had left a box of tags in the shed, but the box sat sealed under a stack of buckets. I checked it anyway. The tape was cut. I told myself I must have missed it earlier. I retaped the box and marked the calf. The third day brought more rain. The drainage ditch filled and spilled into the pasture. I spent the afternoon laying boards where the mud swallowed boots. When dusk came, I counted cows again. One was missing. I followed hoof prints toward the hay barn. The door stood open, though I had shut it that morning. Inside, the smell changed, dry hay over damp earth. The cow stood in the aisle, rope marks on its neck, shallow but clear. I freed it and let it back, careful not to think about how the rope had been tied. That night's sleep came in pieces. The wind shifted and carried sounds from the barns, dull thumps and the scrape of wood. I rose before dawn and found the farmhouse door unlocked. I locked it and checked the windows. One screen bowed inward. Mud marked the sill. The prints were not mine. They were narrow, worn deep at the heel. I began to move through the place with a different pace. I took photos of gates, locks, and the tag box. I checked fuel caps and tool drawers. A wrench lay out of place. A feed bag had been opened and retied with a knot I did not use. I found cigarette ends near the silage pit, pressed into the dirt, the paper damp from rain. I did not smoke. By the fifth night, the pattern sharpened. Gates opened after I closed them. Calves were moved short distances, enough to cause stress but not enough to kill. The hay barn door opened again. I climbed the ladder this time, careful on the broken rungs. The loft smelled of dust and old twine. In the corner, I found a bed made from feed sacks, flattened by weight. Plastic jug held water. Coffee can held ashes. Someone had been living there. I did not call anyone yet. I wanted to understand how long this had gone on. I set the ladder back and left the door as I found it. I slept in the farmhouse with the lights off and the porch bulb on. Near midnight, the bulb went dark. I did not hear it break. I stayed still. Minutes passed, measured by the clock's faint click. Before dawn, I walked the perimeter with a flashlight. The porch bulb lay unscrewed on the steps. The screen bowed again. Inside the barn, a gate chain lay coiled neatly, the latch tied with twine. I followed the ditch to the road and saw fresh tracks leading back toward the cottonwoods. The sixth day, I found records in the office drawer, old paperwork from years before. A former hand had been fired after a fight over pay and damaged equipment. His address was a mile down the road in a trailer long since removed. The name matched nothing I knew, but the handwriting on the tag box tape matched the notes in the drawer, a habit of crossing sevens. That evening, the rain stopped. The sky cleared and the temperature dropped. I decided to flush the loft. I waited until full dark, then cut the power to the barns at the breaker by the house. I walked out with the flashlight off, using the moon. I opened the hay barn door and climbed the ladder. The bed was fresh, the sacks warm. A shape shifted at the far end. I did not rush. I backed down, closed the door, and slid a steel rod through the hasp. I walked to the shed and took the spare chain. I looped it through the door handles and locked it. I did not stay to listen. I drove to the road where service returned and called the owner and the sheriff. By the time they arrived, the hay barn door shook from inside. The chain held. When it ended, the man came out thin and shaking, clothes layered against the cold, eyes red from smoke. He had been living off feed and water, tagging calves to sell later, moving animals to confuse counts, opening gates to force checks he could watch from the trees. He said nothing to me. The sheriff cuffed him and led him away. The farm settled after that. Gates stayed shut. Calves stayed with their mothers. The porch bulb stayed lit. I finished the season and left. The owner replaced the ladder and reinforced the doors. The loft was cleaned and sealed. I still think about how quiet the place had felt at first, and how I mistook steady work for emptiness. I went to that farm because my uncle needed help after his hired hand quit without notice. He never explained why the guy left. The place was a beef farm outside Garden City, Kansas, flat land stretching so far it messed with your depth perception. This was late October 2016, right after harvest season. The fields around the pastures were cut down to stubble, and the wind had nothing to break it. Every sound carried. Every shape felt closer than it was. I grew up around cattle, so the work did not scare me. Feed in the morning, fence checks in the afternoon, and cattle counts at dusk. My uncle ran a tight operation. He liked clean lines and even numbers. The pastures were square and measured. Gates stayed shut. The fences were new 5-strand barbed wire set deep. The ground was hard caliche mixed with clay, pale and cracked, too dry to hold prints. At night, the sky felt heavy and low, full of stars that made the land look empty and watched at the same time. The first count went fine. 112 head. I wrote it in a spiral notebook I kept in my jacket. The cattle were calm, spread out, chewing, shifting weight. They knew routine. I walked the fence line with a flashlight after dark and found nothing wrong. No broken wire, no sagging posts, no sign of coyotes or dogs, no blood. In the morning, I counted again while spreading feed. 110. I went slower the second time. I checked ear tags. I walked the perimeter twice. The gates were closed. The ground showed nothing except my own boot marks and tractor tracks from days earlier. I told myself I miscounted the night before. It happens when the light fades and bodies overlap. The next evening I stayed longer. I counted 112 again. The numbers lined up. I slept easier. By the third day, the same thing happened. 112 at dusk. 110 by morning. I wrote both numbers down. I circled them. I checked the notebook from the day before. The pattern bothered me. 2 missing without a trace did not fit sickness or predators. Cows do not vanish. They leave mess. They leave noise. They leave signs. I spent more time walking fence lines. I checked staples and posts with my hands. I crawled under low spots. I looked for bent wire that could spring back. Everything held. The ground stayed clean. The wind stayed steady. The night stayed cold. On the 4th evening, the cattle behaved wrong. They bunched together near the center of the pasture, pressed flank to flank, heads all turned toward the same place. It was the far tree line along an old shelter belt, cottonwoods planted decades earlier to block wind. They stood still, no lowing, no shifting. Their ears were forward. I had seen cattle spook before. This felt different, felt like waiting. I cut the engine and listened. The wind moved the grass. Somewhere a metal clank came and stopped. I swept my light across the fence. Nothing reflected back. I walked closer, slow, counting under my breath, keeping my beam low so it did not flare in their eyes. The cattle did not break. They did not turn to me. I heard something walking just beyond the fence, heavy and slow, stopping whenever I turned my head. The sound came from the trees. It was not fast. It did not rush. It matched my pace. When I stopped, it stopped. When I took a step, it answered with a step of its own. The fence stayed quiet. No wire moved. No post shook. I told myself it was a man. The farm sat near a county road. Hunters cut through fields in the fall. Drunks wander. The sound stayed on the other side of the fence. I did not see a shape. The cattle did not bolt. They watched. I stayed until the sky went black and the stars burned hard. The sound faded. The cattle spread out again. I finished the count. 112. I locked the gate. I drove back to the house with the radio off. In the morning, 3 cows were gone. Not 2, 3. 109. I checked every corner. I drove the fence with the truck and then walked it on foot. I checked the tree line. The leaves were dry and thin. The ground was bare under the trees. No drag marks, no tire tracks, no blood, no hair, no broken wire. That day I found a scuffed patch of dirt near the far fence that did not look like hooves. It was wide and shallow, smoothed like something had slid. It was gone by afternoon when the wind came up. I started watching the county road. At night, headlights passed slow. Trucks slowed near the farm and sped up again. I wrote down times. I noted license plates when I could, though most passed too fast or too far to read. One night I saw a pickup stop with its lights off. It sat for less than a minute and moved on. I checked the water tanks. One had a lid that did not sit right. The chain was twisted like it had been handled in the dark. I smelled something sweet near the fence, faint, like molasses. I had used molasses blocks before. They draw cattle. The pattern sharpened. The missing cattle always vanished between midnight and dawn. The count at dusk stayed right. The count in the morning dropped by 2 or 3. The cattle bunched near the same place when it happened. The sound I heard came from the same trees. I stopped assuming mistakes. I started assuming planning. The hired hand who quit came back into my thoughts. He knew the routines. He knew the counts. He knew which gates stayed locked and which fences were new. He knew the land. I asked my uncle about him without asking. I thought about the way my uncle avoided the subject and changed tasks when I brought it up. I watched him check the notebook once and then put it down without comment. One night, I parked the truck by the shelter belt and killed the lights. I sat with the window down. The cold seeped in. Hours passed. Near 2 in the morning, a truck came down the county road and turned off before reaching the farm. Its engine idled low. A second vehicle followed without lights. I heard doors open and close. Metal touched metal and stopped. I stayed still. The sound of walking came again, heavy and measured. It moved along the fence, then stopped. The cattle shifted and bunched. I heard a soft thud, then another. Not shots, more like bodies hitting dirt. The smell of molasses drifted again. A low hum started and stopped like a generator or a pump. I did not move. I did not shine the light. The sounds lasted less than 10 minutes. Then engines started. Tires rolled slow and steady. The road swallowed them. At first light, I found the place they worked. A portable panel had been set against the fence to create a narrow chute. The wire had not been cut. It had been loosened and retightened. Staples pried just enough to slip a panel through and then hammered back. The marks were clean. The panel was gone. The ground showed scuffs where cattle had been guided, not dragged. The thuds were animals dropping after being stunned. The hum fit a portable electric stunner powered by a small generator. The molasses masked human scent and kept the cattle calm. The reason there were no tracks was simple. They had laid down sheets of old rubber conveyor belt along the fence line to cover prints. They picked them up and took them with them. On caliche, rubber leaves nothing. The numbers never lined up because the thefts were measured. 2 or 3 at a time kept losses small enough to explain away as accounting errors or sickness. The cattle stood quiet because they had been fed and handled by people they recognized, or at least by people who knew how to move them without panic. The sound stopped when I turned because the men froze when they saw light shift. I brought what I found to my uncle without words. I laid the loose staples on the table. I showed him the smooth dirt. I showed him the notebook with dates and times. He did not ask questions. He did not deny it. His face closed. He told me to stop watching nights and stick to daylight work. 6 months later, he sold the farm. The price was low for that land. He refused to talk about it. I learned later through a neighbor that a ring had been hitting small operations across the county, stealing cattle and moving them before dawn to a private sale yard 2 counties over. The hired hand had been caught helping load at another farm and disappeared before charges stuck. My uncle had been warned once. Insurance covered part of the loss, but only once. The fear I carried out there did not come from the dark or the trees. It came from the precision. Someone had walked that land, learned it, and used it without leaving a mark. The cattle did not vanish. They were taken by people who knew how to take them. When I think about that place now, I see the flat ground and the clean fences and the quiet counts at dusk, and I know exactly how the numbers changed. There were 4 of us, college friends, killing a weekend in southern Ohio in the summer of 2019. Finals were done, leases were ending, and nobody wanted to go home yet. One friend's cousin owned a rundown horse farm and said we could camp there for free as long as we stayed out of the barns. Sounded perfect. A fire pit, cheap beer, no neighbors close enough to care. The farm sat in a shallow valley, fenced fields rolling down toward a line of woods that stayed dark even at noon. The house was empty except for old furniture stacked along the walls. The barns leaned in places where posts had sunk. The horses were calm during the day, heads low, flies crawling over their eyes. Nothing felt off at first, just neglected. We set our tents near a dry pond bed and spent the afternoon wandering the back acreage. The grass grew taller the farther we walked, tangled with briars and milkweed. Fence posts rotted off at ground level. In one corner of the property, hidden behind a rise and a thicket of sumac, we found the well. It was old stone, hand-laid, the rim barely knee-high, half swallowed by weeds. Boards lay across it, gray and splintered, collapsed inward like someone had tried to cover it and given up. There were no signs, no fencing, no concrete cap, just a round opening dropping into dark. The smell came first, damp and metallic, like old pennies and rot. Not sewage, not animal. Something stagnant. Someone dropped a rock. We waited. The sound went down and down, then vanished. No splash, no echo back, just gone. The well made the place feel older than the farm, like it belonged to something before fences and horses. We moved on, joked it off, and spent the rest of the day drinking and cooking and letting the sun burn us tired. By nightfall, the farm felt friendly again. Crickets filled the low spots. Fireflies drifted through the grass. The horses stood quiet, silhouettes against the fence. I woke sometime after midnight to the sound of hooves hitting wire. Not hard enough to break it, but fast and repeated. The horses were running the fence line, back and forth. Dust puffed up under the moonlight. Their breathing carried across the field, loud and uneven. They were not panicked in the wild way horses bolt. They were focused, like they were tracking something along the perimeter. We lay there listening. The running stopped, then started again farther down the fence. Then it stopped completely. Around 2 in the morning, another sound came, faint at first, splashing, not sloshing like someone wading, but quick and uneven, like hands slipping on wet stone. It came from the direction of the back acreage, near where the well was. There was a scrape, then water moving again, then nothing. After that, the horses ran once more, hard this time, then settled. Morning light flattened everything. Dew covered the grass and soaked the cuffs of our pants. We walked back toward the well with the kind of caution that comes after a night of bad sleep. The boards still lay collapsed. The opening looked the same, but the ground around it had changed. The dust was dark and wet in places, smeared with hand-shaped marks pressed into the dirt. Not clean prints. Fingers dragged. Palms slid. The marks circled part of the well, then trailed off toward the woods. There were no boot prints, no clear tracks, just disturbed soil and crushed weeds. The stone rim was wet along one side. Water streaked down as if something had leaned there for a long time. The smell was stronger now, metallic and sour. We did not go back to that field again. We packed up early and left the farm cleaner than we found it. The cousin showed up later that day to check the horses. He saw the well from a distance and stopped walking. He did not come closer. He said nobody used that field anymore. He did not explain why. Weeks later, curiosity ate at me enough that I looked into the property records and old county reports. The land had changed hands 3 times in 50 years. Before it was a horse farm, it had been used for hogs. Before that, for a short time in the 1930s, there had been a small slaughter operation near the creek line, shut down after repeated violations. The well predated everything. It had been dug to tap a cold spring that ran underground toward the creek. Buried in a scanned inspection report was a note about an illegal discharge. Blood, water, and waste dumped into an uncapped well to avoid detection. The practice stopped when the operation closed, but the well was never sealed. Over time, runoff and debris narrowed the shaft, turning it into a vertical tunnel that held water only during heavy rains. Most of the time, it stayed damp and slick, draining slowly through cracks into the creek. The last piece came from a local news archive, a brief item about a man arrested for trespassing and theft in the area months after our trip. He had been living in the woods near abandoned farms, stealing grain and siphoning water. When deputies found him, he was soaked to the waist and had fresh cuts along his arms and chest. He told them he had been washing off blood from an injured leg after slipping into a well on private land. He had climbed out using the stones, lost his grip twice, and nearly drowned. The horses had drawn attention, he said, and he waited until they settled before moving again. The splashing we heard was him trying to climb out of a vertical shaft with no ladder, hands sliding on slime-coated stone. The hand marks were where he pulled himself onto solid ground, exhausted and shaking, leaving wet prints that dried into dark shapes by morning. The smell came from old residue stirred up by movement and fresh blood washed away in cold water. The horses ran the fence because they sensed a person moving where no person should be, close and low and struggling. The field was unused because the well was a hazard the owner did not want to deal with, cheaper to avoid than to seal. The cousin knew. He just did not think about it until we camped there. Nothing supernatural ever happened on that farm. No creature climbed out of the dark. No curse lingered in the ground. What stayed with me was the idea of a man alone in a narrow shaft, water rising around his knees, hands slipping, the only witnesses animals locked behind wire. The well was not a mystery. It was a forgotten hole that kept doing what it was dug to do, long after people stopped caring enough to make it safe. I bought the farm cheap. That was the whole reason. Bankruptcy sale, no competing offers, paperwork pushed through fast because nobody else wanted it. Northern Alberta, close enough to the tree line that the wind carried resin and cold even on clear days. Winter 2021. I wanted isolation. I wanted quiet. I planned to fix it up slowly and live there alone. The drive-in was long and empty. The road narrowed into packed snow with no shoulders. The property sat back from it, a rectangle of cleared land ringed by spruce and black poplar. The house was small and square, built solid but tired. 2 barns leaned away from each other like they were embarrassed to still be standing. Drifts piled against everything. The silence felt thick. The listing said the previous owner left suddenly. That phrasing bothered me, but not enough to stop the sale. People leave farms all the time. Money runs out. Bodies give up. I signed and got the keys. The first day I focused on heat and water. The furnace worked after a fight. The well pump screamed, then settled. I hauled in my tools and stacked them by the mudroom. That night, alone in the house, the quiet pressed in harder than the cold. The wind moved the trees. The house popped and ticked as it adjusted. I slept poorly but long. I started clearing the barns a few days later. The main one smelled like old hay and diesel. In the tack room, I found boots by the door, toes pointed toward the exit. They were stiff with age but not rotten. A jacket hung on a nail, pockets heavy. I did not check them right away. On a shelf sat a can of beans, half opened, the lid bent back. The contents were frozen into a solid curve. A spoon stood stuck upright in the middle. It felt wrong in a way that was hard to name. Not dramatic, just unfinished, like someone had stepped outside to fix a fence and planned to come back in 10 minutes. I told myself the owner left in a hurry and left junk behind. I boxed what I could and stacked it by the door. I worked until dark and drove back to the house with my hands aching from cold. That night I heard footsteps, not inside, outside, slow crunching in the snow, close enough that I could tell the rhythm was human. Even spacing, no drag. They moved around the house once, then stopped. I lay still, listening, breath shallow, heart steady in a way that surprised me. After a while, the sound faded. I waited longer, then slept. In the morning, I pulled on boots and stepped out onto the porch. The snow around the house was marked with prints. A single set. They circled the building once, neat and complete, then stopped directly under my bedroom window. There were no prints leading away, no approach, just a ring. I followed them with my eyes and felt my stomach tighten. The snow beyond was untouched. Wind had not filled them in. They were crisp, heel to toe, the tread pattern clear. My size. I laughed once, sharp, and told myself I had walked in my sleep. The idea fit badly, but it fit enough to move on. People do strange things under stress. New place, new sounds. I swept the prints away with a shovel and went about my day. The next night it happened again. I woke to the sound of crunching, slower this time. I sat up in bed and watched my breath fog the air. The sound passed under the window and stopped. I did not hear it leave. In the morning the circle was there again. Same pattern, same stop point, no trail leading away. I stood over the prints and felt a creeping sense of recognition. The stride matched mine, the slight outward turn of the left foot, the deeper press on the heel. I checked the doors and windows, all locked. I checked my phone, no calls, no messages. I checked the carbon monoxide detector I had installed the first day. The light was green. I told myself it was a malfunction or a prank by my own mind. The third night, I set my phone to record audio and placed it by the bed. I locked the bedroom door. I did not sleep much. I heard the steps again, closer this time, louder. The sound paused under the window. I held my breath and waited for it to move on. It did not. In the morning, I played the recording. It captured the crunching, clear as day. Then a pause. Then nothing. I went outside and saw the circle again. I followed it slowly, noticing how the prints deepened near the house where the wind packed snow into a hard crust. Beyond that, the snow was loose and shallow. If someone walked there and the wind came up, it could erase the trail quickly. But the circle stayed because it was compacted. It resisted drift. That explanation helped for an hour. I started finding other signs. The jacket pockets in the barn held receipts dated weeks before the sale. Fuel purchases, groceries. The boots showed where patterns that matched my own, same brand, same size. In the house, I found a notebook behind a drawer with notes about repairs, written in a hand that slanted like mine. Sleep grew thin. I felt foggy during the day. Headaches came and went. I forgot small things. Tools ended up in places I did not remember putting them. Once, I woke with snow in the entryway, melted into a dark patch, my boots wet by the door. I checked the detector again. Green light. I opened windows. The cold bit in and stayed. On the fifth morning, the circle was tighter. The prints pressed close to the wall, directly below the bedroom. I knelt and touched one. The snow was still granular, not refrozen. Recent. I sat in the kitchen and stared at the half-eaten can of beans I had moved there without remembering doing it. The spoon was stuck upright again, the same way I had found it in the barn. The answer came not as a revelation, but as a stacking of facts that finally lined up. The furnace was old. The exhaust pipe ran through a crawl space that showed signs of backdraft. On still nights, with the wind pressing just right, fumes could pool. The detector was mounted too high and too far from the bedroom to catch it early. Low-level exposure does not always trip alarms. It makes you tired. It makes you confused. It makes you walk. The previous owner did not leave suddenly. He had been leaving slowly, piece by piece, until one night he stepped outside and did not come back in time. Hypothermia takes people quietly. It makes them undress. It makes them circle familiar places. It makes them stop near light and warmth and fail to reach it. I understood the boots by the door, the jacket on the nail, the food left mid-bite. I understood the circles. They were his at first, then they were mine. I shut the furnace down and opened every window. I sat in the cold until my head cleared and my hands shook. I packed what I could carry. I did not sleep another night there. I sold the property before spring thaw. I disclosed what I knew. The price dropped further. I never went back to collect the rest of my tools. Somewhere under the snow, the ground still held those circles, pressed hard enough to last until melt. I did not want to see them soften and disappear. I grew up on a small family farm in Iowa. Corn and soybeans, rotation every year, nothing unusual. This happened when I was about 12, sometime around 2008, when I was old enough to be trusted to wander the property alone, but not old enough to understand how vulnerable that made me. Behind our house, past the machine shed and a stretch of grass that never grew right, there was a narrow path cut through the corn. My dad used it to reach a drainage ditch that ran along the back edge of the field. The ditch was deep and straight, lined with old tile outlets and rusted culverts. He checked it after heavy rains to make sure nothing was blocked. The path was not wide, just 2 feet of flattened dirt where boots had gone back and forth for years. Once the corn was tall, it felt like a hallway with green walls that leaned in and brushed your shoulders. I had walked it dozens of times with him. That evening, I took it alone. The sun was low, turning the tops of the corn yellow while the path stayed dim and cool. I do not remember why I went. Maybe boredom, maybe curiosity. At that age, the farm felt safe in a way that made caution seem unnecessary. Halfway through, the air changed. The sound of insects faded, like someone turning a dial down. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. They were not rustling corn, not leaves brushing or stalks snapping. They were heavy steps on dirt, spaced evenly, staying perfectly in rhythm with mine. When I slowed, they slowed. When I stopped, they stopped. The silence pressed in so hard I could hear my own breathing. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to convince myself it was an echo or my imagination. The corn around me was still. No birds took off. No stalks moved. The path ahead narrowed where the plants leaned inward, tassels brushing my face. I took another step. One step answered behind me. Same weight, same timing, close enough that I could feel it, not hear it. I started walking faster. The steps matched me without hesitation. The sound stayed centered, not drifting left or right like an animal moving through plants. It stayed on the path. I broke into a run. The footsteps ran too. The sound grew louder, closer, heavy feet hitting packed soil. My heart slammed so hard it hurt my chest. The corn blurred. Leaves whipped my arms and face. I could smell the green, wet scent of crushed stalks. I did not look back. I did not think. I ran until the light opened up ahead and the corn ended. I burst out of the row into the open strip by the ditch and spun around. The path behind me was empty. No shape, no movement, just corn. But the stalks were bent low, pressed down and parted, not broken or snapped, as if something tall and solid had passed through without forcing its way. The tops leaned toward each other overhead, creating a smooth tunnel instead of the jagged breaks you get from deer or wind. The dirt path showed deep impressions where boots had struck hard. I stood there shaking until my legs burned. Then I ran back to the house across the field, cutting rows without caring how much corn I damaged. I did not go back into that path again. I tried to explain it to myself as an animal, a deer following the cleared ground. But deer do not walk in perfect rhythm. They do not stop when you stop. They do not run heel to toe like a person. For the rest of that summer, I avoided the back of the field. I stayed where I could see open space. At night, I lay in bed and pictured the narrow green walls closing in. The sound of steps matching mine, patient and close. The next spring, when the fields were worked again, my dad plowed that entire section under. Not just the path, but a wide strip around it. He never said why. He never let anyone walk there again. The drainage ditch got checked from the roadside after that. Years later, when I was older and helping more with fieldwork, pieces of it started to make sense. The ditch had old clay tile running under the field, installed decades earlier. Some of it had collapsed. Some had exposed outlets. Copper thieves had been hitting rural areas around that time, pulling wire from pump houses, stealing scrap, stripping abandoned equipment. People used cornfields to move unseen. Paths formed where the same route got used over and over. One afternoon, while cleaning out the shed, I found a bundle of rusted wire and a pair of heavy work gloves stuffed behind a cabinet. They were not ours. The gloves were too big, stiff with dried mud. I remembered the deep prints in the path, the way the stalks bent instead of broke. Later still, I heard about a man arrested a few counties over for following kids through fields. He had been using farm paths to move between properties, checking outbuildings and drainage lines for scrap. He admitted to testing how close he could get without being seen. He liked knowing he could walk behind someone without them turning around. I thought about the rhythm of those steps, the way they stayed matched, deliberate, controlled. The way they stopped when I stopped, as if whoever it was wanted me to know I was not alone but did not want to reveal more than that. My dad never told me if he found anything specific. He did not have to. He changed how the land was used. He erased the path instead of fencing it or blocking it. He made it impossible to move that way again. The corn grew back thicker the next year, rose straight and unbroken, no narrow cut leading into shadow. From the outside, nothing looked different. But I knew what had been there. I knew how easy it had been for someone to follow a child through a place that felt private and safe. Even now, when I walk near tall corn, I pay attention to the sound of my steps. I notice when the insects go quiet. I remember how heavy those footsteps sounded, and how close they were without ever being seen. I was 17 and needed money, and that was enough to make the job sound fine. Feeding pigs on a commercial farm outside Fresno, California, summer of 2014. The owner paid extra for night shifts because the animals ate calmer after dark. I did not ask questions. I needed cash for gas, school clothes, and to help my mom with bills. The farm sat out past the last rows of almond trees, where the air smelled like dust and feed and something sour that never fully left your clothes. The barns were massive metal buildings, long and low, with ribbed walls that trapped sound. Inside, the noise never stopped. Fans hummed, motors clicked. Thousands of pigs shifted and breathed and squealed in waves that blended together. After a while, you stopped hearing individual sounds. It became a single pressure in your head, like standing near traffic. My shift started after sunset. I drove out while the sky still held some orange, then parked under a yard light that buzzed and pulled moths in tight circles. I wore rubber boots, gloves, and a headlamp. The routine was simple. Dump feed into hoppers, check water lines, walk each aisle and look for problems. The owner showed me once and left me alone after that. At night, the barns felt sealed off from the rest of the world. No windows, just metal doors at each end and a few service doors along the sides. The lights were low and yellow, enough to see but not enough to feel awake. The pigs ate slower after dark, heads down, bodies pressed close. The smell was stronger when it cooled, heavier, clinging to the back of your throat. I worked there a few weeks before anything felt wrong. I learned the rhythm. I learned which pens were loud and which stayed quiet. I learned to keep my eyes moving because staring too long made the noise feel louder. I learned that pigs notice everything. A dropped bolt, a change in light, a new smell. One night, while dumping feed halfway down one of the long barns, I noticed a pen was too quiet. It was not empty quiet. It was tight quiet. All the pigs were pressed against the far wall, shoulder to shoulder, bodies overlapping, snouts lifted. They were staring at the service door at the end of the aisle. Pigs do not hold still like that without a reason. Usually if one reacts, the rest ripple. This was different. They were frozen. I cut the feed flow and stood there listening. The barn noise filled in around the silence from that pen. Fans, metal ticks, somewhere water dripped. The pigs did not move. Something banged from the other side of the service door. It was not a crash. It was not an accident. It was a solid hit, low on the door like a shoulder or a boot. Then another, spaced out, controlled. The metal flexed and popped back. I took a step back without thinking. The pigs shifted but stayed tight to the wall, eyes locked forward. Their breathing sped up. A few let out short, sharp sounds that stopped fast, like they were cutting themselves off. The door handle moved down and up. Slow, deliberate, not rattling, not panicked, like someone testing it. My first thought was that it was the owner, though that made no sense. My second thought was that it was another worker, though I had been told no one else was there at night. My third thought was that it was someone who should not be on the property. The handle moved again. Down. Down. The latch clicked but did not open. I stood there with the feed cart humming beside me, my headlamp shaking because my hands were not steady. I could hear my own breathing over the barn noise. The pigs began to push harder into each other, hooves scraping concrete, bodies sliding. Another bang hit the door, harder this time. The metal rang. Dust fell from the frame. I backed away down the aisle, slow at first, then faster. I did not run. Running felt like the wrong move in a place with nowhere to go. I kept my eyes on the door until the aisle turned and cut it off. I finished the shift badly. I skipped that pen. I skipped another. I dumped feed where I could reach without getting close to side doors. Every sound felt sharp. Every shadow felt like a shape. When I locked the main doors and stepped back into the night, the quiet outside felt unreal. I drove home with the windows down even though the air was still warm. I told myself it was a prank or a mistake. Someone lost. Someone testing the wrong door. 2 nights later, it happened again. Same barn, different aisle. This time I heard the bang first, then noticed the pigs reacting. They pressed away from the service door, heads turned, ears up. The handle moved the same way, slow, careful, like whoever it was had learned the feel of it. I did not go near the door. I shut off the feed and backed out of the barn entirely. I waited in my truck with the engine running until my shift ended. No one came out, no lights turned on, no doors opened. I quit 2 days later. I did not give notice. I did not ask for explanations. I told the owner I was done and left my boots by the barn. He looked tired when I handed them over, like he had not slept much in a long time. Months passed. School started. I worked other jobs. The pig farm turned into a bad memory that faded at the edges. Then I read a short piece in the local paper online. It was buried under weather and sports. A man had been arrested for trespassing and theft on agricultural properties south of Fresno. He had been living in irrigation ditches and equipment sheds, moving at night, stealing feed and fuel. When deputies caught him, they found bolt cutters, gloves, and a list of farms with notes about schedules and door types. One detail stuck out. He avoided people. He tested doors instead of forcing them. If they were locked, he moved on. If they opened, he took what he needed and left before dawn. The article mentioned livestock reacting strongly to his presence, especially pigs. They pressed away from him, went silent, refused to eat. Farmers noticed changes before they noticed missing supplies. I thought about the service doors. They were old. Some handles stuck. Some did not latch cleanly unless you lifted them just right. I had been told to check them, but not why. The owner had said no one else was supposed to be on the property at night. That did not mean no one ever was. It meant someone was not supposed to be. The banging had not been an attack. It had been a test. The handle moving down and up had been learning. The pigs had known before I did that a stranger was close, quiet, patient, and watching. What stayed with me was not fear of being hurt. It was the thought of someone standing on the other side of a thin metal door, listening to my footsteps, waiting to see if I would come closer or move away. The barn had not been empty at night. It had just been shared with someone who knew how to stay unseen.